Dr. Teasel Muir-Harmony is the curator of the Apollo collection at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. She's most recently the author of Operation Moonglow, A Political History of Project Apollo, and of Apollo to the Moon, A History in 50 Objects, which is a book that actually sits on my desk at work right now. She's also contributed to the television series Apollo's Moonshot and teaches in Georgetown's University's Science, Technology, and International Affairs program, which is by far the coolest mixture of different topics I've ever heard. In all of her free time, she does Zoom calls with embassies overseas, apparently. So welcome virtually to Slovenia, Doctor. We're very lucky to have you and appreciate your time. We are happy to have worked with the Nordung Center. We have a moon rock from Apollo 17 that's still on feature there. And we thought this would be a great way to connect with you. You've got a great insight on the Apollo 11 program, the Apollo program generally, and how it's been used as kind of a diplomatic tool or in the history of relations between countries. So I'd like to ask you just a few questions if you can hang out with us for a little while.
I'd be happy to. Thanks for having me.
So the lunar sample that we have in Slovenia that's out at the Nordung Center in Vitanje right now is a sample that was collected as part of the Apollo 17 mission, which was of course the last mission to the moon. It included it was included in the collection of a number of goodwill moon rocks that then President Nixon asked to be distributed to nations around the world. What was the significance of this gesture? Why collect so many moon rocks and distribute them around the world? How does it play into the purpose and the history of the Apollo program?
Well, when President Kennedy first proposed Project Apollo, he was really interested and concerned with the ways that the United States could build better relationships with countries around the world. And this followed through to 1969 when America first landed on the moon. There were a lot of gestures and activities undertaken to make sure that the world could participate in the lunar landing in various ways. And so this included inviting leaders of countries around the world to compose messages that were put on a silicon disk and then left on the moon. And then it also included the moon rock goodwill gifts. And there was one after the Apollo 11 mission, the first lunar landing mission, and then another after Apollo 17, the last lunar landing mission. These also came along with little miniature flags from each country that had been flown to the moon as well. And a big part of the idea behind it was this is a great way to symbolically include other countries in lunar exploration. And the Nixon administration saw it also as a useful way to help build friendships and ties to other countries. They presented these moon rocks, and it also included a program of bringing kids, one child from each country, to the United States to tour NASA facilities and learn about the American space program. And those children then went back to their respective countries and were part of the celebration and presentation of these moon rock gifts as well.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know about that.
Yeah.
Oh man, I wish we still did that.
Me as well.
You have a background and a focus that is very near and dear to my own heart, having studied both diplomacy and being kind of a science-based nerd. I really think that all of the stuff that we do in that regard is really inspirational. But you specifically have studied how Project Apollo shaped the United States' role on the global stage. To many, I think the connection between space exploration and diplomacy may seem remote, or at least a little weird or attenuated. How are these two concepts connected? I mean, what role does space exploration play in diplomacy between countries?
So multiple different roles, and I'll go through them because it's actually a very important relationship, and it's been important from the very start. Scientists have been helpful advisors when it comes to diplomacy and international agreements, and you see cases of this especially when dealing with something like climate change or earth sciences. And then diplomacy has been helpful also for space exploration with international agreements. So the United Nations Outer Space Treaty is a great example of that. And then also there's this other way that is usually space for diplomacy. So the ways that space exploration can help support international relations interests. So there are lots of different ways that space and diplomacy are related. For the Apollo program, it primarily meant advancing the United States' position in the world and demonstrating the capabilities of the United States on the world stage, and then sort of helping build friendships. But then you have other examples like the International Space Station. And this is more common today, where you have countries working together on space objectives. And it's really important for a number of reasons. They can help pool resources and expertise, and then it's also more likely that nations will continue to invest in programs if it has an international relations or agreement element to it. So the United States would be less likely to pull out of a space program if it has partners in that space program. So it's also important for the sort of long-term sustainability of spaceflight as well.
Sure, no, that makes sense. It's a fascinating connection, and I wonder, this is a great time for us to be chatting, because I think in 7 days we've got the Perseverance rover. I think our third, is it, to land on Mars, one of the third robot. And I wonder, is that same kind of diplomacy between nations happening today in relation to, the return to the moon or exploration of Mars?
It is in an important way. So with this upcoming Perseverance rover landing, the European Space Agency, for instance, is helping support that mission through communications and monitoring. So there are 2 European orbiters around Mars, and they're going to help sort of monitor the landing of Perseverance and also facilitate communications between the rover and Earth. And then the tracking network, deep space tracking network around the world is also going to facilitate that communication. So that's just one example of how countries are working together with Mars exploration. With lunar exploration, it's also really important. There's a recent signing of the Artemis Accords, but with the upcoming lunar exploration missions, there's important agreements and international activity, especially when it comes to the Lunar Gateway, which is going to be this space station orbiting the moon. And there are a number of international partners working on that, as well as private space industry.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I wanted to ask you, we've seen recently a number of exciting developments in space travel, and you mentioned the Artemis program and this idea of a lunar gateway, and this all seems like stuff right out of science fiction, right? I mean, that we're going to have a space station orbiting the moon, and we'll use it as a gateway to go to and from. I mean, from the Dragon crew launch to the Mars rover landing in the next week or so, and to our continuing progress on the commercial spaceflight efforts, what we see very clearly as we watch this in real time now is how incredibly difficult it is to explore our universe, even to just get off of our planet. We did this, 50, 60 years ago? I mean, what drove us to reach the moon in 1969? Is it the same attitude or curiosity that pushes us off to the moon again and to Mars this time?
So there's actually quite a big shift in terms of why we're pursuing these types of programs. And in 1961, although many people involved in the Apollo program were interested in exploration and science, the reason that President Kennedy proposed Project Apollo was politics and international relations and the Cold War. And he thought that it was going to be necessary for the United States' position in the world. So the Apollo program and the American lunar exploration efforts in the 1960s were really driven by politics. There was science, there was exploration, but the reason why the United States explored the moon in the 1960s was for international relations interests. And today, I think it's a much greater focus on science and exploration, and this idea that we want to discover new places and potentially find signs of life or learn about our universe. And so I think the emphasis has shifted. There have always been people interested in exploration and science, but the main motivations behind these programs have really now are really now more primarily about science and exploration.
I like that answer, because when you say that they went to the moon because of international relations, it makes me feel like I can kind of call myself an astronaut. If I'm a diplomat, then I'm an astronaut too. So I'm gonna quote you on that. So what's the future? I mean, what does the future hold? We're already living in this kind of science fiction world. What is the future of human space flight, not only for the United States, but for our international community? I mean, we're seeing some really incredible stuff with another rover landing on Mars. I understand this one has like a little helicopter drone attached to it. I mean, everything is really crazy in a way. What's next for us?
Well, with Mars exploration, one of the things to look forward to in the future is the sample return. So part of this Perseverance mission is to collect samples that hopefully in the future will be retrieved and brought back to Earth. And so we can learn a lot more about Mars if we can look at samples from Mars. And so that's one of the things to look forward to when it comes to Mars exploration. With lunar exploration, the potential of long duration stays in the moon will be really exciting to see if humans can actually live long term in another environment, have a habitat there perhaps. And then another important development is the decreasing cost of launching humans and spacecraft into space. And so especially the investments of private space industry have been important in reducing launch costs, and that really opens up a lot of possibilities about what we can do in space and then who can go to space as well. So there might be some more tourist flights in the future, a space hotel perhaps. It'll be interesting to see what happens. Things could change. And then hopefully there'll be even more when it comes to Earth sciences and Earth monitoring. And hopefully we'll get even more refined understanding of our Earth and climate and find ways to use Earth observation satellites to improve life on Earth.
Well, I just hope that as a diplomat / astronaut, they hold a place for me on one of those first lunar hotels. I think that sounds awesome. So your background, I mean, you are steeped in the history of both international relations as it pertains to space travel. And in Slovenia, they've recently launched their first 2 satellites into orbit after having contributed so much really already to space exploration in the past. Not only do we have the contributions of Herman Potočnik-Nordung, who dreamed of a life in space and conceptualized one of the more earliest designs for a space station that would orbit the Earth. But we have a Slovenian scientist who helped design critical components for the Voyager that has gone to the end of the galaxy. And we have 4 astronauts of Slovenian descent, which I think is way overrepresented for many countries. So I have to say that they're determined. It seems like they're determined to be a more integral part of space exploration in the future, which is really inspiring. With your extensive knowledge of space exploration history and international relations, what advice would you give to Slovenians as they continue this great adventure?
I think one of the most sort of important approaches is to look for different types of joint programs, international cooperation opportunities, working with other countries. Obviously, the European Space Agency is a great partner and really facilitates a lot of important work when it comes to space exploration and brings countries throughout Europe together to work on projects together. So a lot can be accomplished in space exploration with that kind of cooperation. It's much more difficult to pursue a space program independently. And I think some of the most sort of robust projects will come from international cooperation.
It's a wonderfully diplomatic answer. I like that. International cooperation is the answer to everything, and that's a good way for us to end. Doctor, we really appreciate you joining us. We really appreciate your knowledge. We would love to have you come visit us physically in Slovenia at some point in the near future, as COVID leaves us, hopefully.
I would love to. I've been to Slovenia, but it's been too long. So I had a wonderful trip a few years ago.
Oh, fantastic. Well, you know what you're missing then. So we would love to have you back as soon as it's possible. But in the interim, we'll make sure we keep you plugged into all the exciting stuff that we're doing with the Nordung Center and with the embassy, which we're proud to sponsor and partner with them. So with that, we bid you a great day and thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.